A warm welcome back to the Forensics Detailing channel. Do not forget to subscribe. Today we're going to do a video on the tough decision if you had to pick between a Porsche 996 or a BMW E36. If you're in the market for a modern classic of the kind of late 90s era. Both of these cars were designed by the same guy, Pinky Lau, with the styling on them. They both look lovely. But let's just walk through, if you're considering buying one of these, what you really need to think about and which one you should probably go for. Let's start with prices. First of all, the Porsche 996s really start at around £10,000 for project ones. If you add a full aero kit to a Porsche 996, you typically add about 5 grand on top of that cost. So your aero kit ones start off at around 15 grand typically, and all of those need work. Good ones can go north of 20, concourse low mileage examples could go north of 25,000. I paid 18,000 for this one a few years ago when the market wasn't quite as dead as it is now. E36s, well, it depends which model you want to get. But I think if you're buying an E36 nowadays, I would suggest that the 328 Sport, which is the model I've got, or the M3 are the options to go for. But there's a radically difference in price. The E36 M3s typically can start around 12 grand and go all the way up north of 20, 25 grand for low mileage course examples. Neither the 996 or the E36 M3 are rocketing up in prices, but generally they're not going down because they're already really affordable modern classics. The 328 iSports that I've got, however, you can pick those up. I've seen those still to this day go as cheap as 3 or 4 grand for high mileage rotters, you'd call them, wouldn't you, with corrosion issues and poorly maintained. But typically 6 grand to 10 grand for most examples, and north of 10 grand seems achievable for really good kind of condition ones with perhaps lower mileage. So there we go on price. But a short summary really is, if you're on a budget and keeping the cost down, the E36 328 iSport or the M3 is probably going to be a more affordable option to purchase. Now I want to talk about styling. While we do that, we'll go out and look at my E36. So the E36 really is a classic BMW styling with kind of sharp lines on the car, but it still has that raking coupe look to it. So from certain angles it becomes more sporty and better to look at, but it's still got those sort of sharp lines on it, which I love. But I think the styling of these is really, really sleek and elegant, and I just think they look quintessentially BMW from the period of time where BMW went from the round headlights on the E30 3 Series and the E34 5 Series. The E36, they jumped into those covered headlights, which gives the front of the car a sort of flatter but different look. And then they moved from that to the E39 5 Series and the E46, where you have the plastic lenses and the curl over bonnet, and it started softening and becoming more curvy at that stage. So the styling of the E36, I think, is a fantastic looking car. It's a compact exec, so it's a small saloon or coupe with the M3 typically and the 328i typically. If you look at the Porsche 996, you can't see it as well in this garage, but I think it's a really sexy design, especially with the aero kit on it. It just bulks it out a little bit more, makes it look a little bit more aggressive. The aero kit front bumper, side skirts, and the tacho wing. I think, for my eyes, and your eyes always change when you own a car, that the 996 is a much more sporty, curvaceous, sexy looking car, but the E36 is a more kind of sleek, classic BMW look. But they're both, for me, both of these cars are really, really sexy. And whichever way, it's going to come down to your eyes and what you feel. Some people feel like the 996 front headlights really kind of detract from the car. But when you own them, you actually really start to like the Gen 1 pre-facelift headlight, and I think it looks kind of cool, and it's coming back and it's kind of looking retro. So styling is a very personal thing, but I think personally this probably turns more heads, but a lot of people appreciate the styling on the E36. So let's just rank up our scores on the boards. So we've got some sort of thing at the end where we can add up all the points, which is a bit silly, but it just gives us something. So I'll give the styling to the Porsche, the price to the E36. The next thing, the drive of these cars. The drive, which one drives the best out of, well, we say out of the box. Mine have got some suspension mods on them, but I've driven stock versions of these cars. For me, there's only one winner in this category, and that is the Porsche 996. It's so well connected. The stock suspension setup on Porsches is a lot more complicated than other cars. It's a complicated suspension system, but the benefits of that are the way it kind of tracks the road almost and rides is really, really good. It feels like a pedigree sports car for not a lot of money. Whereas the E36, its suspension is so simple when you look at like the front of it, and it's like literally like control arms at the front onto the hub, onto a strut, and at the back you've got the lollipops, the spring and trailing arm, and I think one other suspension arm as well. Of course, with both of these cars, you can mess around with the suspension, and everybody does. Both cars benefit from a stiffer coilover setup and a good geo to really get them riding properly. But the other thing that comes into play with that is the steering rack on the Porsche 996 is much more. It's quicker. It just feels better, and the steering kind of response is exactly how you'd want a car to be. Whereas the steering rack on the E36 is slow. Yes, you can upgrade it, and it's just not as kind of dialed in at the front of the car. Ironically, the chassis on the E36, when you get it kind of round a corner and you're leaning on it, the chassis balance is absolutely superb. And it's a different kettle of fish with the 996 because it's got so much weight at the rear and so much wide tyres. It just feels stuck and planted at the back until the moment when it does go. And then it's kind of like a rapid kind of swing. So you just have to be a little bit careful with that. But in terms of the drive, the 996 is a much more sporty, engaging drive out of the box to the E36 for me. You'd expect it to be as well, wouldn't you? One's a kind of, one's a kind of compact exec coupe. The other one is a full out kind of sports car. So no real surprises there. So I'm definitely giving the drive to the 996. The next thing is the engine. Well, the Porsche stock, is it N96 or M96 designator, the flat six, has a lot more torque. And it's just a more engaging kind of experience. The throttle response is faster. It pushes you down the road in a much kind of nicer way. Hard to describe, but the 328i, the one I've got with the M52 engine, is a much more floaty, lower torque, flat six engine, which is really smooth and it's still enjoyable to rev through it, but you don't get the same torque, so you really have to hammer it. That's kind of to be expected. The S52 in the M3 I know less about, but it's got a similar level of torque to the Porsche engine. So I think if you're interested in that kind of engine performance out the box, then you're going to go. The 328i Sport is less of a kind of performance car, whereas the Porsche, even the base Carrera, if you think of it, the M3 is like the top of the range within that 3 Series line. Whereas the base Carrera is like the entry level, if you like, and then you've got like the GT3s and you know, other cars in the 996 lineup. But yeah, for me, the torque that you get from the Porsche engine is really nice. It sounds great. It builds up power as well, and it's like it just loves being driven hard. The M52 engine is absolutely bulletproof and would win on reliability, but it just doesn't have out the box the same sort of miles per mile fun factor. So yeah, engine wise, I'd just give it to the Porsche as well. Braking systems on the car, the stock braking system on the Porsche is actually pretty decent, as you'd expect. I think they're 4-pot calipers, painted calipers, whereas on the 328 you get sort of like these bare metal basic kind of brakes that are absolutely fine for road driving, but a lot of people do upgrade them, you know, which you can do so relatively cheap, but there's no real comparison. I don't know off the top of my head what the M3 braking system is like out of the box. I'd imagine it's okay. We've talked about suspension. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. I'd give it to the Porsche for the way, going on stock suspension, the way that it kind of, you know, gets over the roads, the way it's kind of, you feel more planted, you feel the road a lot more, and you feel like you could drive the car harder. The downside of all that is the maintenance of the suspension on the Porsche is a lot more difficult, a lot more expensive. There's a lot more bushing, you know, bars and things and arms in there that with bushes on them that need maintaining. But the net result is which system is better, and it has to be the Porsche. Next one, interior quality. Well, the E36, for me, generally has a really good interior. And it lasts quite well. There's two caveats to that. One, the headlining on them, the glue and the foam backing perishes and the headlining sag, and it's a pain to kind of take the tub out and like redo the headlining, which we've done on our car in here, and it wasn't that difficult, but it's a bit of a pain. The only other interior weakness of the E36 for me, or the main one I can think of, is the way the door cards are mounted to this kind of frame which pops in on the little poppers. When you pull them off, they break, the frame stays in the mounting, and you end up ripping the door card off of the frame almost, and all of those plastic pockets in there are also mounted to the door, and then they sort of shatter and break. That's a real design weakness that I think is fixed from the E46 onwards. Other than that, I'd say that the build quality and interior quality of the E36 is exceptional. All of these stock buttons on this car that's done 150,000 miles are all in really good condition. The leather on these does wear out. That's the original handbrake. That's been replaced. The steering wheels wear as well, but I would say the E36 is an example of a car where the interior quality is superb generally. The leather in these seats takes a hammering, and it's not as robust as the leather that comes with the Porsche. You can see I've had to repaint this a few times, and the leather's all perished now underneath, so every time I paint it I'm really just giving myself an extra couple of years of not having to you know, retrim them. So yeah, overall very good in here, and I get very few issues. The window regulators in these cars are like chocolate, and they can go, and they do go, and they often need to be replaced. But apart from that, all the buttons and stuff like that, really, really solid. The keys on these cars are really solid and reliable, and they don't tend to break. All in all, the E36 is very good, even the carpet quality and all that sort of stuff. So we'll go back and we'll talk about the Porsche 996. Now, it's a slightly different game of the Porsche 996. For starters, these key fobs, they fail when they get out of sync with the car quite often. Virtually every single 996 I've ever seen, the key fobs don't work and they need to be replaced because it's difficult to do. The stock 996's seats are better than the E36. The leather qualities I mentioned are really good. Door card quality on these, really good. You don't tend to get any problems with the door cards. The speaker quality in the 996s is terrible when the cardboard or whatever they're made of cones just perish and separate from the centre of the cone, and you get the old buzzing noise, which is poor. The centre consoles of them, they're always a kind of painted finish that tend to get beaten up and smacked up. The E36 centre consoles just withstand that. The stock stereo buttons on the Porsches go all soft and rubbery, and the rubber gets all sticky and comes off. The indicator stalks on the 996 are prone to kind of snapping, so they lose their ability to lock in place, which is common. That happened on this one. Headlinings are generally okay. Very prone to leaking sunroofs, which are very common. Most of these have sunroofs, and they tend to all leak to a certain extent, which can cause issues with water ingress in the car. I don't know. That might be a similar tale with the E36 sunroofs, but the sunroofs seem to be less common. The stock gear shifter on the Porsche 996 is, the one that's not a stock one, is too light, and there's too much travel, and it just doesn't feel like a nice gear change. So lots of people end up modifying those. The gear change on the 328i is still a bit rubbery, but it's a lot more solid and usable, I think, than the Porsche gear change. These really benefit from a stock shifter. The accelerator pedals in these cars as well, they are very prone to developing loads and loads of play, because it's completely plastic, and the bottom plastic mounting can fail over time. You get a really wobbly pedal, so I've reinforced that with a metal bracket. Generally, I'm going to say, from my experience of both of these cars, that the 3 Series BMW typically has slightly better build quality and less issues than the Porsche. Could be a little bit speculative, because there's some high quality stuff going on with the Porsche, but I've gone through and given you my reasons. So the interior, I'm going to give it to the E36. Now, as track toys, if you wanted to buy one of these cars as a track toy, I think, my opinion is the 996s generally, they're all old, both of these cars. Yes, they're all kind of knocking on the door of 30 years old typically, depending, but 25 to 30 years old. The 996, if it's running on its stock engine and you're north of 100,000 miles, I think if you track it, you run the risk of spinning bearings, which is something I did, something Dan's done, something I've seen other people do. The stock big end bearings, maybe rod bearings, are just worn out at that point, which you could say, well, it's 30 years old, 100,000 miles, some people say that. But the M52 engine, and I'm not so sure about the S52, generally seem to just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. So I think the BMW engines seem to be quite robust for track work. I know it's a broad statement, and you've got to really go into each engine, and they've all got their little vulnerabilities. But I think if you buy a 996 and you track it, I think there's a very high likelihood that within 1 or 2 years you will do something to the engine which requires it to be dropped and rebuilt, which is expensive. Whereas the BMWs, if you did do something with the engine, you could drop it or take it out and swap it with another one, and the cost would be a lot lower than potentially what you're doing with Porsches. The Porsche engine, I think, benefits from just a few mods, like I've got the deeper sump on it, and maybe a motorsport AOS and slightly thicker oil, even the scavenger pump mod, to try and reduce the risk of oil starvation when you're going around tracks. So I think potentially as a track car, the E36 might be a much more affordable track option, but you would still go through the same process of, perhaps if you're tracking a car, you want to make sure your suspension's good, a stiff coilover setup, which you can do again for cheaper on the E36. Both of them might benefit from brake upgrades, but again, you can do that for a lot cheaper on the E36. And I think as well, when you're tracking a car, like a lot, it's going to get hammered. And I just feel like the Porsche is a car that you perhaps want to keep in a nicer condition and use as more a tourer, whereas the E36, you could be less precious about it. So I've almost done it the wrong way round. I'm more precious with my E36 and I track the Porsche. In hindsight, yeah, I should have done it the other way around. Got a Minter 996 and got a scrappier E36 that I kind of play around with. That would be how I would do it now. I probably wouldn't go down the lines of an E36 M3 track car, just because, again, anything you track that's got an appreciating value, I'm not so sure about, but that just comes down to personal finance, because some people might say that a 15 grand M3 is a cheap track car. To other people, their track cars might want to be less than 5 grand or something like that. I think that's quite sensible personally, because the idea of, you know, kicking around a circuit on a 40 or 50 grand car, I've done, and I think it's too risky, because sooner or later you're going to have an off. So yeah, but saying that, this has been a fantastic track car since the engine rebuild, and I really enjoy putting it around circuits. And the setup on this now with O-limbs and everything is so good. It drives really good on the circuit. You do have to be careful when it's wet. High-speed corners when wet in this car is still a little bit sketchy, I think. You don't get a lot of notice, like the front, it'll feel like the front's going and then suddenly the back will go on you, and then when it does go, it's very quick. Also, when you're going from a twisty where you're going right and then you suddenly go left, or you're going left and you suddenly go right, and you swing the weight of the car one way or the other, you've got to be careful then with the back kicking out, obviously. With the E36, when the back steps out, it's kind of different. You can just almost throttle through it, and it just kind of like, it pirouettes, but it's so much more controllable than the Porsche, whereas the Porsche, you know, doesn't like letting go, but when it does let go, you've got to be really careful. So that's my thoughts on which one you should track if that's your thing. Which ones are the better future investment? Basically, I think that I can't see either of these two cars rocketing up in value. Any E36 really, maybe M3s are a slight exception. But even Aero Kit Carreras, I can't see them rocketing up in value. But I think an Aero Kit Carrera 996 will probably appreciate more than a 328i Sport Wheel, which is a little bit more static. But both of them will probably go up a little bit. Neither of these cars, I think, are really investment cars where you're going to make a fortune. I think if you're going for investment cars, you go for limited editions like the M3, the Evo. Is it the green? Those dark green ones, those British Racing Green ones, or you go for a 996 Jahare edition, or however you pronounce it. Or you go through a GT3, which are obviously a lot more money, but it's always the ones that are limited in number which shoot up. The thing with the 996s and the E36s, they're not particularly limited. There's still lots of them out there. In terms of maintenance, I find it easier to acquire parts for the Porsche than a lot of parts, panel parts as well, and stuff for the E36 are getting harder to source as they get older. Whereas the Porsche stuff, there seems to be so many options and even more aftermarket options that it's very rarely a problem getting parts for this car. Yeah, whereas the E36 potentially could be. Right, so there we go. If we add up the scores on the doors, really, the Porsche 996 has just got more points. It is a much more out of the box, a much more sporty sports car offering, which isn't probably telling you anything you don't know, but you feel that when you drive it. It feels like a proper sports car, whereas the E36 feels like a saloon coupe, you know, depending what you got, with a really good chassis and that you can hammer and have loads of fun with and really like the look of. But yeah, I think the Porsche would always edge this on paper, and the 996s are fantastic value and probably the cheapest 911 that you're going to get, really, aren't they? The 997s are the next tiering up, and the rest of them are all kind of pretty expensive. But yeah, maybe the reason you wouldn't buy a 996 is because you're looking at a 997 or even some 911s. Sorry, 991's a base spec 991 that's a manual, a real cookie cutter spec. They're becoming very affordable as well, and they're much more modern. So the reason not to buy a Porsche is less about E36s and more about other Porsches that take your fancy. For me, it's worth saying that I'm not really interested in buying any of the other Porsches. This does it for me. It's the analog nature of the car. It's the retro styling. It's the affordability. That's what I'm looking for. Something that I can rag around, that I really, really have kind of learnt to just love. That's what I want. The other Porsches, I get to experience them and appreciate them without having to pay for them. And, lots of the other 911s are up in the north of 40 grand categories, which makes them a little bit too precious in my weird head to kind of just use. So I love the fact you can just sort of smoke around in this 996, park it anywhere, and it doesn't matter. It's not most people's, if you go and buy a brand new Kia, Sportage or a Kia, why am I saying Kia? Even like a brand new cheap entry-level hot hatchback as a family car is going to cost you more than what it's going to cost you to buy one of these. So you don't have to get fussy about this, or really the E36. When you're buying both of these cars, it's really important to look underneath them. They're both prone to corrosion along the seals and the rear arches, especially where I'm pointing my finger in there. They can corrode, and you can get corrosion on some of the body panels that scrape out, and then they're exposed. So you want to check for a corrosion on the shells, and obviously corroded components. They will be a bit crusty under there. E36 is exactly the same. You want to look for corrosion on the seals and the jacking points and on the panels as well, because lots of them say, well, I've just got a little tiny rust patch there, it's nothing to worry about. That's a whole rear quarter repaint, and usually if that one's bubbling, then the other one's untidy underneath. And when they've not been done, you're in for expensive kind of paintwork stuff. This was pretty good on corrosion, which is one perk. And my E36 was very good on corrosion as well, and I try and keep on top of that. So corrosion's important, and I also think you want to look for expenditure, because a lot of people buy Porsches and buy these cars because they're relatively cheap, and then they live with the niggles, because if they take it to have those niggles fixed, it can be thousands of pounds, even if it's a suspension. You're going in to have new front shocks, new rear arms or whatever, you could be in the thousands of pounds very rapidly, but it still drives okay. So a lot of times the suspensions get neglected on them. There can be little running issues on both of these cars as well, that they might, they'll run and drive, but there'll be little underlying issues there, maybe vacuum leaks with the E36, or clogged up ICV valves, or MAF issues. So again, you always want to make sure that the car runs and the engine feels smooth and healthy, and it's got evidence of maintenance work on the engine as well as all the suspension stuff. With the Porsches, of course, people talk a lot about bore score. You want to make sure you're doing a cold startup check on a 996 and looking for kind of smoke on startup. But bore score, ironically, on these Gen 1s is less of an issue, and so are IMS bearing stuff, which is the things that everyone seems to think are essential. But no, I would be more looking at the mileage and looking if it's had all the bearings done. If with the Porsche, buying them with recent engine rebuilds is a really good shout. With the E36, it's less of an issue. The final thing is paintwork, because both of these cars, the E36 and the 996, are in that 25 to 30 year rough category. The stock of the original paintwork is going to be shot, even if it's been really well maintained. When that clear coat gets to 25 years, it kind of loses that pop and shine, even if it's been looked after, and it's getting to that point where you're probably going to be benefiting from full resprays. And what tends to happen, as well as the fact they get bits of paint on them, because corrosion comes through and they'll get little bits sorted out. These cars can become all of them can become patchwork quilts, and this one's this is no exception. My E36 was no exception. If you can, buy them that have had full resprays with receipted resprays, for resprays which cost in excess of £6,000 or £7,000, so that it's a full kind of glass out dismantle respray that's been done really well. So you've almost reset the entire paintwork on the car, and you've got fresh paint and clear coat for the next 10 to 20 years. That would be a really good thing as well. What tends to happen is we can buy bottom of market, and we like a project, which is kind of what I did. I paid about £6,000 for my E36 back then, and I bought it because it wasn't rotten. It had the alloys on it that I really liked, and it had coilovers on it. So just straight out of the box, saved me a couple of grand sourcing the alloys and the suspension and the cost of fitting all that. I didn't have to do any major corrosion work, and the rest of it was all good kind of project work and stuff for the channel. The exception to that really was the full respray that was required. I thought I'd be able to get away with doing a bit of patching up paintwork, but then when I looked at it, it just made more sense to paint the whole lot, and rather than do it for like £2,000 and paint bits of it, I think I spent £6,000 and did a full respray. In an ideal world, I'd do the same on this, but because it's a track car, I'm not going to bother. It's had a front bumper repaint that I've done, not me personally, but I've had done, and the front bonnet paint, which was done really well. It's a carbon fibre bonnet. The roof's coming off, as I've said. The rear tacho, because it's red paint, the rear tacho paint, look at that, because it's just fails. The red pigment just doesn't seem to, it rejects the clear coat for some reason. That you probably can't see, but if you can see the little dots, that's got a bit of solvent pop in it. The paint is peeling off of the those are like rubberized, those things. If you ever have a look at them brand new, Dan's got a set of brand new ones. So the rear bumper and tacho needs painting on this, and I'll just put it off because it's a track car, and I'll do it whenever I think, oh, that's terrible. That's getting to the stage, obviously, that needs to be done, isn't it? But it doesn't really bother me. Although saying that, it's bothering me. So there you go, guys. Both of these cars are like my personal kind of end goal with cars, and they give me everything I want. I love owning them. I like tinkering with them, and I like cars where something goes wrong, you're the first point of call to have a go at fixing the problem and solving issues, and Googling and YouTubing solutions and doing the work yourself on them, like, as much as you can to a point. There's only so much I can do equipment-wise and knowledge-wise, but there's so much you can do. And I think if you like tinkering on your driveway with cars, next job I'm going to do the rear brakes and discs and pads on my E36, and it's an easy job. But I love doing all that stuff, and I love, you can go and buy the parts, and the discs and the pads are really cheap, and you think, I've just done my rear brakes there, whole brake system, and it's like 150 quid. It's a bargain. And it works, and you do it. I love all that stuff. I love the sort of having a project where you've got a load of stuff to do and get on with is really part of the car ownership experience for me. And you get that massively in abundance with 996s and E36s that are so established and so well known. A lot of the mods that you can do on them are really beneficial, like the purple tag steering rack. I'll eventually do that on the E36, like the coilovers and the Momo is it Mod 7 steering wheel, the Recaros, the cage in the back. I just like all that stuff. Not everyone does, and I get it, because when I'm looking for cars, sometimes you just want an unmolested stock example, because a lot of DIY mods are bodged, and a lot of the mods on this were not done really properly. Although some of it was done really well, like the suspension was done really well. So yeah, I highly recommend you consider both of these cars, and for the reasons I've just given you. They're great drivers' cars, they're great value, they're great fun, but they are older cars that are 30 years old, make no mistake. They are a continual effort, and they are really, I think, a good choice for kind of petrol heads that love messing around with that. Great choice for YouTubers that can film stuff on the content and build channels around the cars. This has been one of the best cars that I've ever owned. Not in terms of my, the experience I've had with it, 'cause I've blown the engine up and like it's been fighting me all the way. But like right now, this thing drives so well. It's so stiff and flat on the road. Yeah, that can be a bit of a pain, but you get it on a circuit as well. It's just great fun to drive. You can really hammer it. It's just a great car, and I'm staring at the image you're seeing now, and I think it's a stunning looking car. Just an absolute bargain for the money. So thanks very much for watching, guys. If you want to see more content on this, don't forget to subscribe to the Forensics Detailing channel. And also we do a lot of content on the cars on the Forensics Unplugged channel, our sister backup channel with the behind the scenes stuff. So take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.